this country was founded on people who were told they could never beat the British Empire. People looked at the size of Goliath and told David, you'll never beat a guy that big. Well, sometimes it just takes the right rock and the right person holding that sling.
Friends, this is Carr Scott. This program is on tobacco.
Test to the land of the longleaf pine.
North Carolina stands on the edge of greatness.
All right. Oh, man, that intro always gets me hyped. Welcome back to the Longleaf Politics podcast. I'm Andrew Dunn, the publisher of Longleaf Politics. Today, we are going to go back to the 12th Congressional District of North Carolina. Earlier this week, I interviewed Jack Kotiga, one of the Republican candidates in the March primary for the Charlotte area congressional seat. Today, we have his opponent, Addul Ali. Addul's name, if you live in Charlotte, is probably a little familiar to you. Addul was the Republican nominee in 2024, garnering 91,000 votes in the general election against Congresswoman Alma Adams. Sadly, 91,000 votes only accounts for about 25% of the electorate, and so Addul did not come close to winning. However, we talk a little bit today about what he learned in that 2024 race and how he's applying that to 2026. We talk about why run as a Republican in a deep blue district, and we talk about what it will take to turn Charlotte back into Republican territory. So, hope you enjoy the interview, and thank you for listening to Longleaf Politics. I am pleased to welcome to the show Addul Ali. He's the host of his own podcast, so he's probably going to put me to shame here in this format. But Addul is also a Republican candidate for the 12th Congressional District. That is Charlotte's Congressional District. He earned my vote in 2024. Sadly, the election did not go our way. But Addul, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me. Honored to be here, brother. Thank you.
So the reason you're on the show today is you're getting ready to go into a primary contest for the 12th Congressional District. Now, as our listeners likely know, 12th District, heavily blue district. In 2024, you captured about, 26% of the vote in the general election. So why run as a Republican here in District 12?
Well, I think first and foremost, this is a district, obviously as blue as it is, but these are the places that the Republican Party needs to be trying to make inroads. So when we look at getting 91,000 votes in a district that only has about 45,000 Republicans, that tells me that our message of common sense conservatism, our message of trying to find opportunities to build with the unaffiliated and Democrat voters who the Democrat Party's gone too far left for, is something that we need to continue doing. And I also, look, this country was founded on people who were told they could never beat the British Empire. People looked at the size of Goliath and told David, you'll never beat a guy that big. Well, sometimes it just takes the right rock and the right person holding that sling. And sometimes it takes, Andrew, having a vision of saying success might be 91,000 votes and building on that 91 to get 150 and so off, so forth and so on. So it's a matter of thinking that, this district needs somebody calling out the current leadership and willing to get up there and fight and show Democrats and unaffiliated voters that Republicans are about common sense and wanting to do what's best for them.
What do you think the downsides would be if Republicans just completely ceded this race and didn't put up any candidates at all?
Well, we looked at the numbers historically, and unfortunately, when you do not have a Republican running in the congressional seat, and let's just be real, it's not the make or break for the entire county or the city, but it does drop down turnout. And when we have the most expensive U.S. Senate race, when we had a presidential race as important as 2024's presidential race was, we could not afford for anybody to stay home. So I think the downside is obviously you've got to be willing as a candidate, and we as a party have to be willing to go to where we typically don't go, to have conversations we typically don't have, and be willing to do things completely outside of the norm that Republicans traditionally do.
Yeah. Yeah. And you pointed out to me before we hit record on this that it wasn't that long ago that Charlotte had a Republican mayor. It wasn't that long ago that Charlotte or Mecklenburg County went red in the 2012 election when Governor McCrory was elected. What is it going to take for Republicans to be competitive in Charlotte again?
Well, look, I think we've got to do one thing above all else, and that is be willing to have conversations with people that aren't Republican. We all agree it's great to be in the echo chamber, but we have to be willing to go talk to communities that we've never talked to before. We have to have a bigger presence in the African American community and minority communities, Hispanic, Asian, Indian, all that stuff. We've got to be willing to do that. But we've also got to be willing to recognize that not everybody's going to love the way we do. Not everybody's going to pray the way we do. Not everybody's going to agree 1,000,000% with every policy. What did Reagan say? 80% my friend is not 20% my enemy. And I think we've got to get back to a level of common decency in our politics in this country. We've got to tone the rhetoric down. One thing I'll say, Andrew, I have a lot of friends who happen to be on the other side of the aisle, and I follow the Thomas Jefferson philosophy. He said something like, I never saw a difference in politics or philosophy as a reason to distance myself from a friend. And that's what I think we have to do as Republicans is say, look, there are some folks who the Democrat Party has just gone way too far left for. We need to appeal to those folks. The unaffiliated voter is the largest voting bloc in our district, in our county. What are we doing to go talk to those unaffiliated voters? It does us no good to have a brunch, have a lunch, have an event, and we're not pulling in unaffiliated voters so they can hear what our policy ideas are and find out what's important to them. So I think a combination of all of those things and being willing, first and foremost, not to compromise our principles, but meet people in a spirit of love and say, look, I don't agree with that. Where's our common ground? That's how we become competitive here.
In your conversation so far, where is that common ground? Where do you see that common ground residing in? And what conservative issue do you see as most resonant among folks who haven't historically voted Republican?
So everybody wants safety. That is a number one, we could just start there. In politics, they always say it's the economy, stupid. Well, no, before the economy, people want to be safe. And I think there's a lot of common ground and people wanting us to figure out ways to have a criminal justice system that not only serves justice, but also affords people the opportunity to become contributing members of society. So there's a lot of common ground to be had, I think, in the criminal justice side and safety. We talk about affordability. Everybody, I don't care who you are, everybody wants to be able to afford a decent home and have be able to go out and get a steak if you want one. I think that there's a lot of common ground in wanting our economy to be strong. Now, the way we get there, how we go about accomplishing that, I think is where, we might run into a little friction, but there's a lot of common ground on that. And last and certainly not least from what I've heard on the ground is around ensuring that our public education is the best it can possibly be. I'm a big school choice champion. However, my children are the products of CMS schools. I know we have amazing teachers, amazing resource officers. We've got administrators working as hard as we can, but I think we also have a lot of common ground in wanting parents and control of education to be as local as we can get it. So if that means diverting all of those trillions of dollars, I think it was $268 billion was the dollar amount on the Federal Department of Education. Imagine what that money could do back in the hands of control locally. Imagine what that does for parents that don't want to send their kids to public school, that want to send them to a charter school. So, I think those three areas on affordability, on safety, and on wanting the best possible education is a lot of common ground.
Yeah, it's a good point. And, we've talked about getting the message across to unaffiliated voters, but there's also a message that you have to send to political donors. The counterpoint to the argument that, we need to run candidates in every race is that, there's only so much money to go around. We should focus our energy, our money, our attention on races that we can actually win. So, what's your response to that? And how do you talk to a potential donor who might have that concern that maybe they should not be giving you money and instead putting it in the Whatley race or some other congressional district that's a little bit more friendly to Republicans?
That's a great question, and I understand the argument completely. I get it from a strategic standpoint. I think that makes a lot of sense. But what also makes sense is if you were to talk to a donor and say, look, the Whatley race is supremely important. The first congressional district race up there is extremely important. I'm not asking you to give me 50% of what you're going to give them. I'm asking you to invest 5% here. I think the other side to that is you have to create a compelling reason for a donor to understand the need for that investment. And that's something I think our campaign this time has been able to do, because we've been off to a great fundraising start, far exceeded my expectations. But I think that is the key, is creating a vision of something that donors think is realistic, that they can buy into. And back to that other point of creating realistic expectations for the candidate that'll translate to realistic expectations from the donor. So, you're not going to go to a donor and say, give me 500,000 and I'll flip the 12th district. Not going to work that way. But give me 50,000 so that we can compete in a digital sense, so I could use my campaign as a means to help promote the Senate candidate to the Black community that I'm making inroads in. It's about creating a smart method of investing in a campaign that may be a long shot. That's, I think, how we reach out to the donors and make a case that, investing in these local races where it's not seen, so much of a sure thing is a good idea.
Yeah. And that's a great segue to something I wanted to ask you about is, what did you learn on the 2024 campaign that has influenced how you're doing things differently in 2026?
Well, great question. And I'm going to tell you, I will not be as polite to Alma Adams as I was last time. I tell you, you think and say, okay, I got a grandma and I don't want to be rude or disrespectful to my grandmother. So we were very polite last cycle. I think we will be less so, not that we'll be rude or, ad hominem attack, but we will highlight her voting record and how bad it has actually been as it relates to what's in the best interest for the people of this district, be they Democrat, unaffiliated, or Republican. The other big thing that I learned is buy more sneakers. I ran through 4 pair of sneakers last cycle, and we're going to probably do that again. So try to buy sneakers in bulk this go around.
That's smart. And you should probably buy those hats in bulk too. That's pretty sweet.
Well, we got them online. They're available. We go to aliforcongress.com and get one. Yeah, they're available.
Awesome. I love to hear that. Yeah, I think it's a great point you make. I think you can be pointed. I think that's totally fair to be, quote unquote, rude. When I was a young cub reporter, one of the first big stories that I was covering was a CMS superintendent who was resigning, and he came into the office, and I was a little nervous. I was asking him some tough questions, that there were some allegations against him that were pretty serious. And, I was kind of scared, and I was trying to, say the question in a polite way, in a nice way. And he looked at me and he said, look, superintendent is a full contact position. I expect hard questions. I expect people to be blunt with me. So ask the question. Don't be afraid. Ask it. I've heard it all before. And, this was more than 10 years ago, but I still think about that all the time. And, superintendent obviously is a full contact position. Member of Congress, how much more so is being a member of Congress a full contact position?
Look, I have a simple philosophy: is you need to be among the people to know what's important to them. This is stuff that we should be dialoguing about. This is stuff that we should be able to sit down, have a conversation, meet out our differences, and figure out what's the best way forward. If I'm elected to Congress, one of the things that I plan on doing, Andrew, and this carries over from my 2024 campaign, is spending as much time in the district as humanly possible, number one. But number two, setting up congressional advisory committees on small business, on youth crime. One of the campaign promises is, if I'm elected, the first thing I'm going to do is set up the Congressional District 12 Anti-Crime Task Force. We have to be, as congressional people, our job primarily is to represent the district, and you only do that if your focus is the district, you're meeting with people in the district on both sides of the aisle, and you're taking what they need and what they think into consideration.
Yeah, but Addul, haven't you heard, if you're talking with people on the other side of the aisle, that means that you're not a fighter and that you're not standing up to the Democrats?
I mean, hey, I will point this out to people. President Trump had Mamdani in his office. President Trump took a phone call with Governor Walz and Mayor Fry. President Trump was willing and is willing to work with anybody to do us in the best interest of the American people. And so should we, as congressional representatives, our local officials, be like Frederick Douglass said, I will work with anybody to do what's right. I don't care what letter you have after your name if we're trying to do what's right by the people. Now, that doesn't mean we get to sacrifice our core principles or even budge on our core principles. But that does mean we need to work to find common ground, especially in a district this blue. We're going to need to be able to work across the aisle to get anything done for this district. And that's why Alma Adams really hasn't gotten anything done for the district, is because she's not willing to reach out to the other side.
Well, that's a great message, Addul, and I think that's a good place to leave it for today. Again, we've been speaking with Addul Ali, a Republican candidate for Congress in the 12th District. We spoke earlier this week with his primary opponent, Jack Kotiga. If you want to go back and check out that interview, feel free to do so. Addul, always a pleasure. Thank you again.
God bless. Take care.
North Carolina!